Yeah, I mean, historically, if you think about the impact um, of Aristotle's works becoming available within like a set of decades, right? In a already literate milieu, it's um, it's pretty massive. I mean, they had Cicero, a lot of his works. They had Seneca. They had Augustine, Boethius. Big heavy hitters like that. They weren't. They didn't have a lot of Plato until the Renaissance. So he's not really on the scene, but they know about Plato. And then
Mhm.
suddenly you get your hands on this. And there's also like learned Arab commentaries and at least a couple really important Greek commentators that are available too, like Alexander of Aphrodisias, who interestingly, so Aristotle gets called the philosopher. Alexander is called the commentator. I actually have, I don't know, did I ever tell you guys about this? I have a essay in the Journal of Hot Takes, which is kind of a joking project put together, which claims that Plutarch is a better Platonist than Plato is, and Alexander of Aphrodisias is a better Aristotelian than Aristotle is. And part of the reason is because they are coming later, so they're able to like think through what the great philosopher did and what they didn't do, and they're able to do that in relation to the other schools that have subsequently developed, right? So Aristotle can't address the Stoics because they didn't exist in his time. Alexander of Aphrodisias, the Stoics have been around for uh, about 300 years, making arguments why the Aristotelians have things wrong, right? So he can say, yeah, the Stoics say this, and here's why they're wrong. Here's how an Aristotelian would respond, which I think is pretty cool, you know. But there is another sort of like secondary phenomenon that was very common from about the 19th century onward, and I think still has a lot of sway, which is basically, you got the pre-Socratics and they're kind of screwing around, figuring things out, but they're smart but dummies, right? And then we get Socrates coming on the scene, and Plato, his really his only important student, and Plato develops this wonderful metaphysics that, we're not quite sure exactly if it's coherent, but sure is fun to read, and he's pretty brilliant. And then he's got a student, Aristotle, and Aristotle moves from idealism to empiricism and actually looks at the world. And, that's a good thing too. And so, we've got these two great philosophers and the two great systems. And then after that, it's just kind of downhill until we get to Plotinus, because Plotinus is good, but all this Stoic and skeptic and Epicurean and later Platonist, it's all just kind of derivative nonsense. And if you look at the history of this developed first among the Germans
Mhm.
in the 19th century, and it's also tied in with this idea that the Greek city-state declined and became just a part of an empire, right? Alexander and the
Yeah.
successor kingdoms, and then the Roman Empire. And that like led to less innovation, less creativity, less tackling big projects, and more focusing on how to make your shitty life not so bad, the way the Stoics and the skeptics and the Epicureans did. And so Hegel says this, and then popularizers like Windelband will say this, and scholars like Jaeger will make these claims, and then it becomes like the the standard take, right? If you're an educated person, you just know this is the take, right? And so then you don't bother to read the ancient Hellenistic philosophy, or if you do, you read it kind of sloppily, right? Because you already know that Plato and Aristotle are the only game in town. And I think this appealed to the Catholic Thomists, because Thomism becomes like a big concern after Aeterni Patris in the late 19th century, and then it like takes over everywhere, and it fits this really neat, nice narrative where Plato and Aristotle, right, and then Augustine and Aquinas.
Mhm.
Augustine is a Platonist. Aquinas is an Aristotelian, and everything got solved by Aquinas. So you got the more secular academic philosophers doing it over here, and then you've got, the Thomists doing it over here, and it becomes just like something that we all know, and it gets its way into like philosophy textbooks. So then you get philosophy, began with the pre-Socratics, then it's Plato and Aristotle, a bunch of crap. Then we get, the Middle Ages, and they like to talk about arguments for the existence of God, and so we'll put in a chapter about that. And then, there's this thing called the Renaissance, but we're not going to read any of those people. And then we get to modern philosophy. Now we get Descartes and maybe Thomas Hobbes or Bacon. And now philosophy begins again, right? And when you look at this stuff, you're like, well, who the hell actually was dumb enough to buy this line? And the answer is some really, really smart people who got themselves convinced of it. And it's still like the standard take in a lot of places down to the present, unfortunately. I think the last 50 years, there's been a lot of good academic work done on Hellenistic and Roman philosophy and on, better medieval stuff. So it's not just, well, there was this guy Augustine, and then, there was Boethius, and there's this weirdo Erigena, and then Anselm, Abelard, Thomas Aquinas. And then it all went to crap with Scotus and Occam. There's a wider range of reading of these scholastics, which is good, but it's still a minority viewpoint.